Well, Todd Rose, welcome back.
Hey, it's good to be back.
I think this might be your fourth time on the pod. We're breaking records here. Just keep putting out interesting studies. Uh, Before we get to your study, I just, I can't help but ask, what do you think? What do you think about this presidential race? I'm sure you've been following all the polls, focus groups, all of that. What would you put your probabilities at today?
It's well, I'll probably lose any bet that I try to make, but it's because the way this is going, something else is going to happen, right? But it's been interesting to see Harris and her team really seem to capture the zeitgeist. And when you just look at private opinion on this stuff, they've really moved toward where the center of the country is in private in ways that I was surprised. I didn't know. Most parties seem beholden to their fringes in ways that aren't productive, and it seems like they got the memo. So it's been interesting to watch.
Do you do specific polling data using your methodology? And as a reminder to the audience, we've explained this so many times, but if people are new to the audience, your methodology separates what people say in public from what their private preferences are. We've explained this many times before, and we could probably do a quick explainer on it. But do you do that also, like, specifically for preferences for the presidential election?
We don't. And there was one reason for it, which is everything we care about at Populace is about a better society, and we're focused on culture. And so it was just sort of our view that while politics is important, there's lots of people doing that. And we're really just laser focused on culture and mindset, because we think everything's downstream from that. So we felt like if we got into the sort of horse race stuff, that it might take us in a different direction.
And so what you're saying is, like, based on the study that we're about to talk about and some of the prior ones that you've done, the moves that they've made are largely in the direction of what people are saying privately in your opinion research.
And even the tone, right? Like the idea of anchoring around joy is people are just privately sort of sick of the doom and gloom. And frankly, if I can say it, the shit talking of the country. It's like, look, we have problems. Can we start focusing on the future? Can we, we're looking to leaders to actually bring us together towards some common aspiration rather than divide us for their own benefits.
Yeah.
And
so it sounds like you're bullish on Harris.
I think that it'll be tight just because of the way the electoral college is structured. But I'm actually surprised, frankly. I didn't think that campaign had it in them, but they've really pivoted. My hunch is that there's a lot of the Obama folks involved
Pluff.
now. Pluff is. You could see his fingerprints all over this, right? Like, it's even the resisting of sort of leaning into identity, where it's like, that's the classic line with Obama. It's like, we knew he would be the first Black president. You don't need to keep telling us.
I've been spending all morning reading your study. And what's funny is I almost think of, for people who haven't read your studies yet, we're going to link to them in the show notes. And the way you visualize it is there's a dot for what people say publicly, and then it moves in a certain direction, left or right, to what they reveal privately. And in a weird way, that is the Harris, like the entire Harris project has been, she started where a lot of the like public sentiment is of what what some people are saying, or at least directionally. And the campaign has moved in the direction of, what, like, she's moderated, which is typically what campaigns do. Trump seems to try to defy gravity on this, but by and large, people tend to move to the left in the primaries, move to the right.
That's right.
In the general. She hadn't had a primary this time, but she was shaped so much by the 2020 race, 2019-20, and seems to have moved pretty quickly to the moderation. But as we'll get to in this, in your data, what it means to be with the American public is not intuitive.
That's right. That's right. And so I think it's like, it's good that this is happening. It's good that it creates an interesting contrast. Like, even think about, like, they've captured things like freedom, like really, really just owning that instead of running away from those kind of things. And you'll see it's very consistent with people still kind of like freedom. Right? They
Yeah,
don't really like.
overwhelmingly in your data. Well, okay, let's get to your study then. So set this study up for us, like put it
Sure.
in context with all your other work.
So as listeners know, like we do private opinion research, not public opinion polling. And the difference is simply that people aren't telling the truth about their views. They don't feel like they can. And so if you don't realize that and take that into account, then what you're polling can be quite distorting, not because you did anything wrong, just because people aren't telling the truth. And so we use methodologies that get around that social distortion by giving anonymity and plausible deniability. And we didn't invent the methodologies, so I don't mind bragging about them. They're really good, and they are good predictors of behavior. And so in this case, one of the most important things that we care about, and I know you share this, and this is what you do, is we aren't having conversations and we're making a lot of assumptions about each other that are really just these illusions that are distorted by the fact that we're all self-silencing. And so the public discourse really doesn't resemble the American public. And we'll talk about it. This has real consequences. So one of the things, the reason, the motivation for this was the biggest study we've ever done. And I would say probably the most expensive one too, but over 19,000 people in the sample, which is crazy for that kind of thing, is that, like, I know that I'm feeling pressure to have the right opinion on things, but how in the world would I know that you are too? Right. And so we tend to assume other people don't feel the same pressure. And so we often will take what they say at face value. So we want to do a couple of things here. One is to quantify the problem. What is the extent of social pressure in the country? And then more importantly, let's start looking at the consequences in terms of where is this pressure leading us to outright misrepresent ourselves in ways that are really bad, like false consensus level bad. And then what are the downstream consequences, as we'll talk about, and things like social trust, institutional trust, sense of unfairness in society. And so we wanted to put that out there so that we could have a productive conversation as a people.
And so you have, sort of two sets of data here. One is just how people feel expressing themselves. And then you have issue by issue. So let's start with the former. What are people saying about their willingness to share their true beliefs?
So that it's a little bit terrifying and maybe not surprising. So we asked a couple of things. One is, it turns out the best way to get at social pressure is to ask people whether they think most other people can be honest about their views. Turns out it's just code for whether I think I can be honest. but it's, if you ask me, Todd, can you be honest? I'll be like, of course I can, right? And it turns out that we've got 58% of the country thinking that most other people can't be honest about their views. That's really bad. So we're going to track that social pressure score over time. So we start getting used to it. We color coded it. I was excited, make it like the terrorist threat level, So we just kind of gauge like, well, what happened, right? Okay, but let's think about that next step in general, which is the idea of self-silencing. And we just asked people, and other people have asked this same question, like, will they admit to, in the past year, withholding a view, right? Because you were worried about offending people, not sharing your opinion. 61% of Americans admit that they have self-silenced in the past year. That is so bad. It is so high. And it's like, what's interesting is it's every demographic. That's what was kind of interesting to me. Because you might think, well, there's certain groups that are not able to say what they think. No, it's everybody. It's everybody. There isn't a single demographic where the majority isn't self-silencing.
Now,
Isn't that wild?
To play devil's advocate on this, like, obviously, like, this tracks my understanding of things, but a critic would say, well, there's like probably the social and political equivalent of "do I look fat in this dress" type of phenomenon, which is like views that just like because of politeness and context, people don't share their views.
Yeah.
And as we'll probably get to in the data, consistently you have found that, for instance, people don't want, for example, in their corporate life, their company expressing views on issues. So like, how do we parse through like what is just simply polite society, or like, you know, like I have this view on like pick controversial subject, and I'm like, yeah, I probably just, it's not worth it. And like, that
Right.
would have been true in 1950. That would have been true in
Mhm.
1970. And in 2024, I'm still going to like
Yeah.
contextually share what I believe when it comes to, in the
Yeah.
right social
It's a
and
great question.
professional context.
And that's, like you said, some of that kind of polite society stuff will exist. And you could even argue it's not necessarily a bad thing. So how we parse this is you go to that next step, which is, okay, let's actually do the really heavy lift of measuring across 64 highly sensitive issues. Like, if this was just polite society and I give you anonymity to reveal, then I'm going to get something like we should not see the an unbelievable amount of outright misrepresentation of their views across this. And so that 61% turns out to be understating the problem. Those are just the people who admit to this. Uh, when we look at going about, it's one thing to say, I'm just going to sit back and say nothing. It's another thing to say, I'm feeling the pressure to have the right opinion. And so I'm willing to go against my privately held views and tell you the opposite of that because I know it's what you want to hear. That's what we did for the bulk of the study. So 64 highly sensitive issues spanning everything that we could find that seemed to be generating a lot of controversy. And we did, like you said, we did a whole major representative sample just with public opinion, normal polling. And we give them statements. And, like we've talked about, like Hamas was justified on October 7th. It's like, it's just do you agree or disagree? Well, you know that I know what your answer is there. And so I'm going to get your public view will be all the social pressure loaded up into it. And then we deploy this methodology that actually provides the anonymity and plausible deniability. And then we see what your actual view is. And so when you look across those 64 issues and some like a couple of dozen demographic subgroups, every subgroup, every one of them is outright misrepresenting their views on multiple issues, some of them so badly that it creates a false consensus. So as a group, they are saying one thing publicly, the majority, and the majority actually believes the opposite in private. It's just wild.
Yeah. And we're going to get to issue by issue. But before we even get there, a couple other top line trends here. One is that people tend to, across political parties and demographics, so men, women, for example, have way more in common than one would think.
This is almost skipping. I'll skip to the end here and give the good news, and we'll kind of work through all this. We're not looking for good news, right? If it turns out we are just privately divided, that's not great, but we can handle it, right? There is an approach to how a diverse, sort of pluralistic society can hold together across real differences. But the truth is when you get under the hood and get past the social pressure, it is actually shocking to me how common we are as an American people. Not just that we have a lot in common, but what we have in common, which feels very, very similar to traditional American values and principles that right now a lot of people feel like have been lost.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it probably makes sense at this point to get into it. So let's start with I'm just going to like share what I think are some of my more interesting things that pop out to me here. Number one is institutions. So we can kind of work from broad to narrow here. Americans publicly say they don't trust institutions. Privately, they trust them even less.
This is, and it's funny, this is one of those where it's like I love to memorize all the data. Now I always have a cheat sheet with me because this is a lot of data, right?
Yes, yeah, I have one in front of me too. Yeah.
Yeah, this is good. This one's pretty easy though, because we already knew, let's just take trust in government, right? It will not surprise anybody that people don't trust the government. But what was wild is the statement that we used. And by the way, just to make sure we weren't putting our finger on the scale of things, whenever possible, we use the exact language of reputable polling firms that have been done before, right? So like a lot of this language, like, so we just looked at, the statement was like, I trust the government to tell me the truth. That's it. not like do a whiz bang job, just don't lie to me, right? So publicly, only 22% of Americans trust the government to tell the truth. That's not good. It's so much worse in reality. Only 4% of people privately trust the government just to tell the truth. And what I found super interesting is when you look under the hood in terms of demographics, in public, Democrats have the highest rate of saying that they trust the government. It's like 36% of them say they do, but only 5% of them do in private. So it's like, what are we doing here? Right. And like what this tells me is sometimes the easy sort of boogeyman for this on the left is to say, well, Trump basically convinced us all we couldn't trust the government. And I'm sure he certainly put gasoline on that fire. But when you look under the hood, it's just there's something more fundamental going on. Our government has lost our confidence. And rather than looking for other people to blame, there should be a look in the mirror about that behavior. Because when an institution loses the trust of the people that actually pay the bills, that is not a good place for a democracy to be.
Yeah. And then, speaking of democracy, the views on diversity are really interesting. So on the one hand, people are more, they want a more diverse country generally, more than they would even say publicly. And the numbers are pretty high for just people wanting a more diverse country. But there are certain policies, affirmative action, or just the general statement of should we treat people differently based on past injustices, those policies and or general approaches pull extremely low. Like the latter, meaning treating people differently based on past injustices, I forget the exact number here, you might have in front of you, it's extremely low.
3%. 3% in private.
3%. And interestingly, Democrats on this one, publicly 30% agree with the statement it's okay to treat some groups differently in order to make up for historical injustices. Only 5% of Democrats believe that privately.
Let's expand this conversation. I love this because I think probably in terms of top 3 most important insights from this data that I want people to be really clear on, there is a massive return to meritocracy in America. So when you look at affirmative action for college, how you hire like the best person for the job, how you promote people, what criteria, right? Whether you should have diversity quotas for executive positions, up to like, again, how we treat groups that have been historically marginalized. Across the board, you're getting consistently 3/4 of Americans wanting meritocracy, okay? And this is really important, and they want more diversity. What I thought was fascinating about the diversity statement was it wasn't, are you okay with diversity or some status quo question? The actual statement was more diversity would be good for the country, more. And in that case, you have 64% of Americans privately want more diversity. So what I think is important about that is I think the most interesting conversation going on in America right now is around this issue of meritocracy, the DEI stuff. The Economist article had a great one on the sort of decline of wokeism, that sort of thing. And here's the thing. If you look at our data and go, hey, everybody wants a meritocracy, let's just dance on the grave of DEI, that is not the solution, okay? It is true that the equity part of DEI was not good. Treating people as members of groups and pitting those groups against each other, surprise, surprise, did not lead to more diversity and inclusion, right? It led to tearing us apart. That does not mean, however, that we don't care about diversity. And so when you look at the meritocracy stuff, it needs to be always viewed in the context of the diversity data as well. And if you see those together, then what you're seeing is an American public who's saying, we see the value of diversity, we want more of it, and we're not even okay with some of the sort of unfairness that shakes out of this. But there is a right way to solve that problem and a wrong way to solve that problem. And so you're seeing some of the green shoots here of new solutions, because the public, you got to give them a better solution. So that's why I was really impressed with Johnny Taylor at SHRM, which this is the Society for Human Resources Management, right? This is massive. His courage to say, we're taking equity out of this. We are focusing on diversity and inclusion. And he's taken so much flack for that because it looks like he's reacting to conservative pressure, when in reality, and if you know Johnny, you know he's not reacting to anybody. He's saying, no, we care about a diverse workforce. We do. And we care about individuals feeling truly included in the workplace. And we tried this one where treating people as members of groups, and it didn't work. And so now we've got to have a better solution. So I think you're going to see now that there are courageous people, not just pointing out the problem, but actually giving us better solutions that are consistent with our private values. I think you're going to see breakthroughs on this. I think it's going to feel both more constructive and, importantly, we'll talk about this later, more fair.
And how do you, when you think about this, to broaden it out to the presidential race that we were just talking about, how would you apply that lens to what's going on right now? Because I'll just point out a couple things. We talked about already, like Harris de-emphasizing the historic nature of her candidacy, the pluffisms of that, right? That would certainly be in line with this data, right? Democrats have a lot of history on this kind of stuff, so it's going to be really hard to fully detach themselves from the identity politics, but it seems like they're trying, right? On the flip side, the Republicans have been accused of white identity politics, and the Springfield, Ohio situation, I think, would be exhibit A of that. When you look at something like Springfield and the way Trump and Vance have seized on that moment, and based on what you know about this sort of complex feelings towards diversity itself, meritocracy, like, what does your data tell you about how to view an issue like that, and who's being smart politically or not, whether Trump is onto something or not here?
Yeah, so I'll just say this is informed speculation on my part. So I'll anchor it in data, but obviously this is just, my interpretation is applied to it. But I actually think that the way you saw the reaction to the Haitian immigrant stuff in Springfield shows you that the sort of baiting of people into demeaning and hating on, looking for a scapegoat didn't work the same way. I mean, yeah, there was a few people that jumped on it, but I don't know if you were as surprised as I was how fast people are like, it even got turned into a punchline joke and songs making fun of Trump rather than all of a sudden piling on Haitians. Right now, again, I'm not saying that there aren't threats and there aren't fringe groups that take that seriously, and that's important. I see it in the context of our data on immigration as well, which has a similar kind of trend, which is that the majority of Americans believe that legal immigrants add more to the country than they take, right? They have a positive view of that, which is really good. And at the same time, they believe that if you came here illegally, you should be deported, right? Like, I mean, that's just where Americans are at.
Yep.
And they don't, and I think both sides in the fringes have tried to bundle those things in a way that it's like, well, if you're not essentially for open borders, you must hate immigrants, and you're like,
right. That was the 2019 frame of the Democratic primary. Yeah,
that's right. That's
and they've
exactly
been kind
right.
of outrunning that perception ever since.
Yeah, and I think that it was interesting to me. Like I think that the Springfield thing worked for a small audience, but it didn't have the sort of contagion effect that maybe even only a few years ago. That's the lens it would have been viewed through. I don't know how did you see it?
Well, I largely share your view. The one question I have is twofold. One is immigration tends to be a good issue for Trump, despite a lot of things that I have issues with, like him taking his own Republican border bill and seemingly wanting the problem to grow for political reasons and basically outright stating that. And the data from public opinion research that somehow, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this, but which seems to be consistent with what you just said about legal versus illegal, which is the majority of Americans support mass deportations, which to me, I could see people having the distinction between legal and illegal that you just described. That is my general policy belief. At the same time, being more pragmatic about people who are here and trying to figure out what to do with them. But when you ask people in this public opinion data, they seem to be like, okay, yeah, I'm okay with deporting all these people. Not sure they know what that means in practice.
I don't think they do. I think it's the sentiment though. And I'll tell you where I think that comes from, based on our data. This unbelievable sense of unfairness in society right now. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. 93% of Americans believe our society right now isn't fair. I mean, how in the world can we function like that? And we can talk about what I think is under the hood there, but like when you see stories like, okay, people come here illegally, and then California's like, let's try to give them like loans for homes or, free health care. Or and it's like, listen, I understand the impulse. I'm not saying we shouldn't care about common humanity. But when people feel like their society, a society where they're a citizen, isn't fair to them, that they're being taken advantage of, and then to be told that we'll take your tax money and give things to people that you may not even have with your money, you can see how people might feel a little bit like, all right, enough is enough. And I think that the other thing is the reality is even when I can deeply sympathize with people who come here illegally, like I get that not everyone's a criminal. That's just not, I think most of them are not, right? And if I were in Guatemala and my family's life's at risk, you bet that I would do whatever it takes. I can hold that view and also say a society cannot hold, even from an infrastructure standpoint, if we don't have some sense of who's coming and how. Okay, all that can be true. So when you see the sense of unfairness, you see the stuff, and it's like, well, they're here illegally. There should be consequences. My guess is, if I were predicting it, I would say what this tells me, their optimistic view of immigrants in general, their willingness to deport people who came here illegally, suggests to me that you could get a middle ground thing where it's like, look, at the end of the day, here we are. And so if you laid out something like, listen, if you came here and you haven't committed a crime, you know what I mean? I think it's that aspect of like, but if you did, we're going to get rid of you and you're not going to come back 7 times.
Yeah. And meaning like, and you're absolving them of the crime of being here, right? You're saying
Correct.
like that crime
Correct.
is
and then you have to package that with and we're not going to be back here again in 20 years. We've got to, like, you got to have a secure border, right? You don't need to close it down. And we even see that in the data. Like, you don't need to close it down, but you do need to have some security there. And if you do that as part of a comprehensive approach, I think that would be wildly popular. It's just politically seems like, especially on the Republican side, they're just doubling down on, it's like, play that same song again, hoping that it'll get the same reception, which I don't think it will right now.
Well, let's talk education. Some really fascinating stuff in here. Let's start with college. So you have long found something significant that is revealed pretty clearly here, which is Americans seem to have a pretty low opinion of college generally. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, but here's what's amazing about this. So we've been tracking this. The nice thing is it's always great when the data shakes out like the theory says it should, right? When under a collective illusion. So for so long, people have felt like, I don't really think college should be like the only option. I want other things. But I think most people think it's college or bust.
3% of people say a college degree is not worth it, right?
What's funny about this is, so for a long time up until now, the pressure was to say college is great. Even as privately you wish there were more options, this doesn't seem right. That illusion now is shattered so fast that the momentum and pressure has now swung to the other side, where everybody feels like the right answer is to say college isn't worth it. But in reality, like, it still is for the right person, and they know it, because it's funny that this is how it always happens, right? If you think about, like, for example, the swing in like gay marriage, it was like so many people are like, I don't really care. What do we believe, people? Right? And so the second you feel like the tide turned, people jump to the bandwagon. And so you'll see that momentum. That's happened here. And what I want to call out here,
it's a 29-3. I have
yes. And here's what's hilarious though. When you look at the different groups that are outright lying about like college graduates are lying.
Yes, the higher income people who are saying
higher income. But think about the college graduate. Like, because I was thinking, what would be the motive to devalue the credential you have? And I think it's because you want it paid for. I want my loans paid off. And if I said, oh, of course this was worth it. Well, it's a little hard to then argue someone else should pay for my loans. Like that's
He's like, I do think
yeah,
it's now like it's in vogue to be like, and look, I believe some of this is that like as somebody who's former school principal, that there was too much of an emphasis on college as being the only path,
right.
right? But I continue to believe that every kid who walks through the door of a school, um, up until late high school, when they opt to do something else, should always have adults who are ready to guide them on the path to a college degree,
Yeah.
if that is their choice.
Well, so to me,
And that
you're
should
getting
be
to something
everybody's.
really important. It is about ensuring that every child has genuine choices. And so it would be a disaster if we were like, I don't want to go the way of some European countries and even Asian countries where like, hey, at 14, we'll give you a test and we'll tell you whether you'll get to go to college. It's like, no, no, no. We should prepare every kid to have meaningful career choices, and college should always be one of those choices. But we shouldn't denigrate and devalue skilled trades. That should be that like opportunity pluralism. So as long as we don't like keep ping-ponging back and forth between these extremes, like everybody go to college or no one goes to college, it's like, no, it's a really good option for some people, and every kid should be prepared to be able to make that choice.
Speaking of choice, you ask people um, about school choice, and the data here is fascinating. Vast majorities of people, 79%. And so it's like overall, it says 67% of people publicly say they support school choice. 79% of people privately say that. For Democrats, it's a pretty big swing, 67 to 78. For independents, it's even bigger, 64 to 88. I just tweeted about this, and like somebody on my Twitter went back at me and was like, well, how do we know what they mean by school choice?
Well, so that's what's interesting. When you look at that statement, we chose the school choice word intentionally because, as you know, that is a very, very loaded idea, right? Like people, it turns out when we do the qual on it, people always, they assume as some version of like backpack funding, right? It's like it's a very, very well understood term that is very polarizing historically, as you know. So that shocked me.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is it does the opposite of what critics would say. Like the critics is going to say, well, school choice is kind of like a unassuming term that who wouldn't want more choice. But what you're saying is politically, this has meaning. It means ESAs, it means charter schools, things that are explosive politically and have divided.
And this has been a debate for decades, right? About and so school choice took on it's a very loaded term that means the most like extreme version of that. But let's even play devil's advocate on that and say, okay, what if they just meant like within district choice? Well, they still don't have that.
Right.
Like, so what we could let's just give it the most conservative explanation here.
No neighborhood school boundaries. Yeah.
Yes. So even if we just give it that, which that would be like the simplest thing, right? That doesn't exist. You have something when in what other area of American life could you get 8 out of 10 Americans to agree on something that has those kind of ramifications? And so I look at that and say, hey, Democrats, your own constituency wants greater choice for parents. And so like the idea that you're going to dig in your heels and keep pretending that public education and government schools are the exact same thing, you are going to lose that argument. And you and I have talked about this before. We both care deeply about public education, products of it, not like it would be a disaster if the American public lost faith in investing in each other's children. And public education might be the greatest thing we've ever accomplished as a people, the mass education of that. But this idea that the only way to do that, or even the best way to do that, is to allocate your child to a school based on your zip code and condemn a bunch of poor kids. And then the overlap there is like marginalized communities to things and then call that democratic and call that fair. Well, guess what? Most democracies don't do it that way. Most democracies have a lot of choice for families. And I think it's in that choice space, if folks who have traditionally fought against school choice realize they are so far away from the American public right now, then get in the game and let's have a productive, more nuanced conversation about the limits of choice and make sure we don't create a bunch of negative externalities in this swing toward our commitment to greater optionality for families.
And I can't remember this when we talked about education. Do we have data using your model on specific subtypes of school choice, like the equivalent of ESAs, homeschooling, charter schools?
Yeah, so we did this, and this was just in some of our exploratory stuff. So we haven't. I'll have to go back and see if we've made any public. But it's and I will say, this was a couple of years ago, so I'm sure it is changed a little bit. But you wouldn't be surprised, the less transformative the question, right? People get, it's just less risk. So it's almost like the idea that people should be able to choose which school within a district that your tax money is funding every one of those schools is kind of like, is like the most noble. Most people are just kind of shocked that that's not the case, especially if people don't have kids. They just sort of like, wait, what? Like, but the big change from our stuff is this idea of some version of backpack funding. We've actually specifically asked, should parents be able to take money, like taxpayer money, and make a decision about their child's education, whether that is the public school in the neighborhood, private schools, or even homeschool options. And there is overwhelming majority support for that statement. So I just think what we have to recognize is this is part of a broader trend away from compliance culture, away from, you know what, let's let the experts tell us what to do all the time, and wanting to reclaim a little more self-determination. I think that's healthy if we can help make it constructive, and it can also burn it down if we're not careful.
Yeah,
Education is sort of
that is the knife's edge. You know, I had on Andrew Clark from Yes Every Kid. He's a listener, so he's probably listening to this now. That data is music to his ears, but that knife's edge is what I have long been just curious about, because I'm super excited about the new educational models that are coming about because of this loosening of restrictions. At the same time, I'm not immune. Like I'm keenly aware of the systemic impact, because even when we were starting charters, I always felt like we had to recognize the impact we're having on districts. Now, I happened to start charters in Nashville, where we were growing as a city, so we were playing a role of like basically handling the growth for the district. But then I started charters in Jackson, Mississippi, which is a shrinking district. And there I continue to, I'm just keenly aware of it. It was a district that really sucked in every possible way. But then I continue to believe that our role there had to be awesome. And even till this day, when it's 2 successors later, and they posted like a C grade for the network that I started. And like, I was just talking to somebody who's involved with the network. I'm like, that's not good enough. If you're going to be part of a systemic change to a district that's losing money, you need to actually be dramatically improving things. Yes. Because you're part of the same ecosystem, same community,
Yep, exactly right. And I think that this is why I want the left to wake up on this a little bit, because we need their voices, because the right conversation that we have to be having as a people is, whatever we were doing in the past is not good enough anymore. Look, it was valuable. I get why we did it. People want different outcomes for education now. And they don't feel like the way we've allocated our kids to schools is fair. And when you combine those things and the desire for greater control, that is a powder keg. And like, I think of it the same way that, like, remember, like the collapse in support for state schools at the university level. And people, like, they don't want to spend their tax money. Why? Because their kids can't go there anymore. Like, why am I funding something my kid has no chance of participating in? It's like, cool, we have a good football program, which I happen to like, but like, but it's like, it doesn't seem to relate to me. Well, if you're going to keep telling me that the unions and other folks, these guys are all going to make the decisions, my kid's going to go there. And like, the truth is, I know this is a cliche statement, but it's important. We've always had school choice for rich people. That has always existed.
Yeah, but the cliche is true here. It's like such a powerful cliche. People could roll their eyes at it all they want, but absolutely, you have money, you have school choice.
Yes, and so for me, as someone who grew up in of modest means in rural America, I'm keenly aware of two things. One, the lack of options that we had, but also the reality that if we were living in this moment right now, I might get left behind. Do you know what I mean? And so it's not enough to just say, hey, look, just expand choice and everything will be great. That is going to be the heartbeat of a better system. But we have to be thoughtful about what it means to be fair in this. And that means really tending to, like, if we're going to make claims, like you're saying, hey, this is better. Well, it really better be better. And if it's not even better for the people for whom the current system is actually absolutely failing, then it's a hard pill to swallow that somehow it's magically going to be better for everybody.
Yeah. The challenge is in small districts, I think, which is the conversation I had with Andrew, which is let's say you have a district of 1,000 people. And it's like razor thin budgets every year. We're trying to keep the roof above our heads and all that kind of stuff. And I start Gupta Academy, where all we do is surf and play tennis all day. Now, there could be 40 kids who decide that's good for them. Now, pedagogically and everything, it might not be great for the community, but if it were New York City, nobody would care. But in a district, if I can convince 40 people to go to Gupta Academy and that's all we're doing, and then that's 40 times 10,000 or 15,000, depending where you are, less for the district. Now it's a community conversation. And now they should be scrutinizing me. This is my I'm expressing my opinion. Now we need to be scrutinizing what my educational model is, kind of like we do charters. So this is my kind of nuanced position on the sort of ESA thing right now, which is smaller the district, the more stakes are involved for every little school we hand out to people. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
And I'm directionally there with a lot of these people, but I just think like good is like, there's a subjective feeling of good. What is good? And I get it. Like if we were in a big area, surf skate is a good example in Florida. Like there are like there literally is an example of a school that's kind of what I just described. Like I'm sure they have a better academic model than I just described, but these idiosyncrasies, we're such a weird country that anybody could start any school and probably pull off a couple people. And the question is, how do we, permissionless is the word of the day. And directionally, I'm with it. Like, we don't want to be asking, permission from the people who benefit financially and all that from the system, but we also need to be practical about your school that we hand out to people.
And when I think about, because I'll just full disclosure, I'm more on the side of permissionless. I just have no faith in these so-called experts to engineer. Like they've done it. It's just not good.
I'm closer to you than I just described, but I just want to give a hard time to, because I talk to a lot of the same people you do. And I just kind of view it as like, I'm like their most supportive Democratic friend, but I also think it's like my job to raise like what I think are really important objections.
That's right.
Sometimes when we're in the hype train, we might be missing sometimes.
No, I 100% agree. And I think that, what's interesting is when we then get into this kind of conversation where we can say, no, look, where we're headed is enabling more choice. But how do we ensure that still ladders up to something that truly benefits the community and, that is actually worthy of the name? And I think, you start thinking about, okay, what is our job to say, what do we expect that a kid is going to be able to do, even if you're learning to surf and skate, right? And it's like, as long as it's not Gavin Newsom decided this is what everybody needs algebra 2. Why? I don't know, because it correlates with college. I mean, that's not a good enough reason. That's right. A ridiculous reason, and it means you don't understand how correlations work, because you'll destroy the correlation by making everyone do it. But never mind. That's right. But maybe you should take algebra 2. But the
we don't teach that in California anymore.
Right? No, right? Exactly. But the thing is it's like there are certain things, academic things, that I would call like catalytic skills. So reading, writing, arithmetic, basic math stuff, right, that it's hard to argue that it's not okay to say every kid should master these things. Why? Because it's not about the thing itself. It's that each one of those unlocks and expands more opportunity. If you can't read, your opportunity landscape is unbelievably narrow. And so I think it's okay to say we expect that kids should be able to do these basics, and parents want that. So we're just responding to that. I would say a really cool example of this shift of, if you care about fairness and you want to ensure this really does benefit everyone, in the high school movement, which was really the biggest transformation of education ever, where we built a high school a day for 22 straight years in this country. What was fascinating is as that hype train went going, because it was like clearly the economy demanded something more than the education we had. And places were building schools and then
with almost no diversity of model.
Correct.
Almost zero. Like,
but here's what's amazing about it. In places like Iowa and Nebraska, they start realizing, wait a minute, some towns were building schools and that community was benefiting wildly, and other towns didn't have the resources, couldn't hire teachers. So they shifted their focus. Instead of saying, look, no one gets to do it until we all do it, because that's not how anything ever really works. They started creating incentives, right? So for example, one of them was at some point they said, look, you guys don't have to create your own high school in this town, but if you don't create the high school, you have to pay for every child in your town to go to the neighboring town. But it's like, well, now we're just increasing the home values of our neighboring town. So let's just build the school ourselves. They also gave grants, block transfers to communities to top off to hire teachers, right? To create a little more fairness in terms of their ability to build a school if they wanted to. So I think it's as much like, how do we ensure that we didn't just pass policies that in theory make it seem like people are going to have choice? There's nothing to choose.
Right. That's the problem. It's a supply side, which I actually think the ESA world, the education savings accounts for people listening, world is going to do much better than we did in the charter market. They already are. Yep. Of diversity of offerings. Yep. And I gave the cartoon character version of it, but I do think like they're going to be smaller models. People are going to try new things in a way that permissionlessness that you talk about is going to allow some beautiful things. It's going to lead to some stupid stuff, to be clear, and everybody should be prepared for that. There are certain pockets of issues. Like I got a good message from a former special educator that used to work for me the other day who listened to some of these conversations and was like, this is my worry, is like there are certain pockets like that that are very important, and that even in the charter market where we were required by law to serve all kids, there were schools that were bad actors on this, and we've refused to serve those kids. And I think these are going to be real concerns for people.
And can I say, Ravi, that this is why having the left in on this conversation is really important.
For sure.
Let's give the still man version of that. Yeah, are there people who just want to sort of rent seek, and it's really about it's a jobs program for like union members? Yes, but I think that the impulse on the left to protect this thing can also just be a core sense of fairness and a worry that, whereas in other aspects of free markets where it's like, hey, we'll innovate over here first and eventually it will get to everyone.
Well, take special education. The implication, which needs to be taken seriously, is it's not like the average special educator believes that we're serving kids well in special education now in the traditional system. They're just worried it's going to get worse. Yeah. So I think we should start with that very important question and say, how can we design a system? And New Orleans got this right eventually. Yeah. So when you look at New Orleans charter schools, the initial experience for special education kids who are on IEPs and need other special assistance, even in a high funding state like Louisiana, was very mixed in the beginning, and the market got much, much better. You know, and there's certain pioneers in this world like Ben Markovitz from Collegiate Academies and others who built really awesome programs that were better than the district ever created. And I think like this is where the supply side is really important on the education side of things, is just like coming together and be like, all right, let's take these considerations very seriously. Let's make sure that the funding, recognizing the students who have special needs, and that we actually create, you know, like external organizations and incentives for people to create awesome schools that are serving students on IEPs extremely well. Not necessarily just students on IEPs, because you don't want to just concentrate kids who have special needs in their own schools unless the parents want that, or the needs are so significant that you can't avoid it. You know what I'm saying? Like we're still in the beginning. It's a Wild West right now, really.
It is, but the thing is two things have changed in a fundamental way. One is the technologies to scale more bespoke models are there now, right? Yeah, I'm not saying tech easier. Is the answer for everything, but it is
content is easier than ever. Yeah, I talked to Doug Lamov about this over the weekend.
Yes.
Yeah,
and like, for example, I'm on the board of a Khan Lab School. So Sal Khan is a friend of mine. Like, what he's cooking up right now in terms of modularizing and scaling the component parts of that, not just Khan Academy, but the ability for literally anyone to take the pieces, combine it in a way that serves their particular needs, but still has unbelievably rigorous academic backbone.
Todd, you're not taking into account educator arrogance. When you mention Khan to the average educator, they're like, I teach fractions with unlike denominators better than they do. And I'm like, bullshit.
Yeah,
I ran
bullshit.
excellent schools. I ran excellent schools in Tennessee with some of the greatest educators I have ever come across. They were awesome. A lot of them on a good day have better explanations than the best YouTube video and all that. But on an average day, it's tricky. And you know what? If they can take for granted that content and then build on top of it, coach the kids, help the kids with their gaps in knowledge, take time to get to know them better. That's a better use of their time, even if they're really good at explaining the content.
That's the human aspect of this is like, it's sort of like, listen, your value add is no longer, I can explain this to the masses, because like, just like right now, look, if I want to learn physics, I'm gonna go read Richard Feynman's Red Books, and I'm gonna listen to anything Richard Feynman ever said, because he was really good at explaining it.
Or you go to the kid with the 10 million YouTube count. There's something to be said for the fact that you can go, there's some MIT professor, for example, who has 10 million views on, the kinematics, like an entire kinematics thing. And is it going to be me in a classroom, sleep deprived after, pining over by Bills getting their asses kicked last night, walking into a classroom and delivering the same thing that this MIT guy is? Or is it probably better just to quality control on that?
You're bring up something really important. It's the quality control aspect. It's like, it's drop dead easy to let everybody try to explain the thing that matters to them. And we can actually use our technology to say, actually, we this one's more likely to be really resonant for you, and you can choose that. The second part of the technology that makes it just so much better, especially for base academic stuff, is it creates more precise feedback loops, right? It can give me just in time information about what I'm learning, where I'm not quite getting it. That the feedback loop cycle, when it's human to human, it's like, okay, I took a test like last week and I got some feedback, and it's like, so that's nobody's fault. So it's like, but the technology is not going to replace the human. It's going to allow the human to do some really amazing things. So, but if you take the tech, which is now here at scale, and the marginal cost is almost zero, it's pretty wild now. The other thing is just the shift in the public appetite for change and the shift in what they want education to be. Those two things is like, if you just look back and go, I know where this is going. Like this is, and so again, my appeal to my left-leaning friends is that I believe deeply that as someone who cares about a more pluralistic public education system, I believe we will get to something truly great if you're in the conversation, because you'll hold our feet to the fire, that you can't just hand wave that it's going to be better for everyone. Because make us do the hard things, make us figure out how to make it work for kids with special needs, right? How to make it work for kids that are coming from highly impoverished environments with very, very jagged background knowledge. Like that's possible, but like anything, when you're trying to scale something, you might look for the path of least resistance. That this can't be that time.
Well, this is like, and I know a bunch of these people listen to this pod. So my word to any of my friends in the ESA world who are listening is, I had this thought the other day. It's like they're almost postmodern, some of them now. They're like, well, you can't, there's no truth. Parents want, what does it mean to be good and bad? They don't want standardized tests. So they remind me of some of my friends on the left sometimes. I tell them, the right-wing sort of and conservative ESA and homeschooling people are the revolutionaries now. They want to burn down the system. They want the radical change. They might not be wrong, but the one thing I want to, like, if I ever had a debate that maybe two people would show up to, it would be on this question of relativism. It's like, I do want a little bit of objective truth in the system. Like it does make sense to get the kids to read and write and to know that we're doing these basic things really well. There are certain metrics of success and all that. They very understandably are allergic to these things because it's the man telling them what to do, getting their business, creating permission structures and all that. But we don't have time to talk about all this, Todd. I want to be respectful of your time. What have we missed in the study? Because, we could point people in the direction. I don't want to, I don't want to overstep here, but tell me
Well, no, I think
what did we
obviously
miss?
everyone's going to go and read the
The
145
whole
pages,
thing. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. Listen, I got to get my money's worth, so please do. It's pretty comprehensive. I bet we could talk for 10 hours on it, honestly. So, here's what I'd say. I think one of the most important things in this study, from my perspective, for culture and for how we dig ourselves out of this tailspin as a society that we've been in, is the relationship between self-silencing and social trust. Because social trust is everything when it comes to culture in democracies, right? If we don't trust each other, then we have to control each other. And then we get into this zero-sum fight over who gets to control whom. And that's just not good. And it's not consistent with where we want to go as a people. We want some different things from our institutions. We want more control of our lives. That's going to be scary. That's going to require change. And no one likes the uncertainty with that. The level of social trust we have as a people is what will hold us together. Okay, so we already know that in the US, social trust has been on the decline every generation since Frederick Taylor implemented scientific management in the 30s. Like, it's not good. We found in private, it's like 38%, I believe, right? That's not great. Scandinavian countries, you get up into the 50%, you start really, really good things start to happen. Okay, so when you think about this, the really fascinating thing is we cut the data on social trust based on whether or not you admitted that you had to self-silence at some point in the last year. If you had to self-silence, only 30% of those people believe most people can be trusted. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like, if I have something I want to share, but I don't believe I live in a society where I could even share a different view, why would I trust people? But here's the good news. If you look at the people who didn't self-silence, the 39%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in sheer numbers is like more people than probably every Scandinavian country combined. So it's a big chunk. Those people, 52% of them think most people can be trusted. That's Scandinavian level social trust. In fact, those two groups, if you look over the last 45 years, that 30% level would represent some of the lowest levels of social trust ever recorded in America. Conversely, the 52% are some of the highest levels. So that tells me something. Like, we can start to move the needle on this trust if we get back to having the moral courage to be respectfully honest about our views with each other, and the civic courage to start making it safe for other people to do so. And that's why I don't mean to just puff you up more. This is why this is one of my favorite places to come and talk, because having these conversations is how you do it. Because what do you find almost every time? Oh, shoot, I really exaggerated, like, the two of us. I really would have assumed when I first started having conversations with you that we would probably be really far apart on some things. Turns out, I'm sure we have disagreements, but we agree on a lot of stuff the more we talk, right? And
yeah, it's funny you say that. I have a recurring guest, that won't call him out, but who routinely thinks about me the way he first met me. And he always says this thing, which is like, and you're super left. And I'm like, that's weird. It's a weird, no, even my biggest MAGA audience members wouldn't call me super left. But I'm like, but he only knows me in this one context where we're on opposing sides of a race. And I'm like, I could never undo that impression with him.
No. And so look, here's the good thing. That when you look under the hood and you realize it is shocking how much common ground we actually have as people, and how much of that is being distorted by our unwillingness to just tell the truth and the illusions that are generated off of that misrepresentation, you have the conversations, man. And like, now that you know that the consequence of this social pressure, it's not just accountability, right? There are ricocheting cultural consequences and institutional consequences for this pressure. When it is putting downward force on social trust, when it is increasing the sense of unfairness in society, when we lose faith in our institutions, like, those are extinction level problems if we're not careful. And just realizing that whatever the impulse was, the silencing of other people or allowing that to happen is just unacceptable in a liberal society. And so it's okay. We all have a role to play, right? We all can get ourselves out of this tailspin. And so I hope that the takeaway is, hey, wait, just taking small steps to ensuring that we can have a better discourse as a public actually is more than just the free exchange of ideas, although that's valuable in and of itself. You would be doing more to improve the fabric of our society in terms of trust and fairness than anything else you individually could do right now.
Well, Todd, thank you so much. So to get the study, we're going to link it to the show notes. But what else? Anything else you're plugging right now? I know you have a bunch of books that you.
I'm selling these gold watches. Oh wait, no, that was Trump. Never mind. 100 grand for a watch.
Crypto, the Todd Rose cryptocurrency.
I just want to know if someone listening did buy one of those $100,000 watches from Trump. I just want to hear from it.
Honestly, my mind immediately went to my father, who's a MAGA state Senate candidate in New York, and he's the kind of guy who pays money to go to all these fundraisers and to get the photo with, Eric Trump or whatever for $10,000 or whatever. I worry about him. Next time I see him, I'm going to check just to make sure he did. I saw him last night, but he didn't have a gold watch on. So that's
all I ask
news
for you, and I think this is a great way to close, is if you don't mind, just send him a signed picture of AOC.
Yeah.
I just it's no, this is it. For me, we care a lot about, we don't have to all have the right answers, but we do have to have the right conditions that allow us to talk to each other. And, purposely quoted Frederick Douglass in the opening of this report, because the self-silencing doesn't just harm the person that you silenced. It really does harm everyone, because I think I'm right on every opinion I hold, and then I'm smart enough to know that's definitely not true. So how am I going to move off of error and get to better ground truth that will make my life better, except through these kind of respectful conversations like we're having today?
Well, Todd, thank you so much, my friend. Enjoy the soul coughing concert.
Thank you. Go Bills, I guess, because the Patriots are just unwatchable.
We're in okay position. Bad night last night, but you know what? It happens.